Thus, Japan rid herself of the old samurai, but their fanatical spirit was passed on to the new peasant soldier, Bushido code and all. The warlords now flung open their doors to the West. Posts and telegraphs were introduced, railroads, the European calendar, photography, European dress. A frenzy of modernization seized upon the land. With a politeness such as the world has seldom seen, the Japanese invited other nations to help them build up their military power. And always with the thought, treat with the foreigner, learn his weapons, and then use them to destroy him. The old Bushido double cross. The English, having the best navy in the world, were invited to build up and train the Japanese navy. The French, supposed to have the best army in the world, were invited to train the Japanese army. But when they saw the French defeated by the Germans in the Franco-Prussian War, the Japanese switched to German advisors for their army. From the English and the Americans, they borrowed the outward forms of democracy, ministers and their representative body, the Diet. But this was all a cruel joke, for the Army and Navy cabinet ministers, still actually descendants of the old feudal barons, are above and beyond any law-making body. They have direct access to the emperor and can entirely bypass the civil government. In fact, whatever Japan took from the West or the Chinese, the warlords never took the moral or ethical principles that went with them. All modern knowledge that has come to the Japanese people, all culture, all ideas, all thinking has been filtered through to the people from the top down. Any new idea is first tried out by the ruling classes, changed to suit their purpose, then with the emperor's blessing handed down to the people as divine law. In our Western civilization, practically all the ideas, the forces that have changed our thinking have come from the bottom up. Evolution or revolution starts with the people. With the Japs, evolution is handed down to the people. Japan was westernized by decree, not by popular desire. In spite of westernization, everyone in Japan still rules over his inferior and in turn bows down to his superiors just as they did in the Middle Ages. Women have the least standing of all. They must obey the males in all things. Even today, there isn't any moral right or wrong in Japan. Merely, are you or are you not obedient to your superiors? For instance, today, a father still has the power to sell his daughter when she is 11 or 12 to a factory or a mill. She will eat, sleep, and go to school in the factory, but all her earnings will go to her father. Or, if she is a little older, and he needs money, the father can sell her outright to a geisha house or house of prostitution. And modernization has done even less for the standard of living. Individual welfare still doesn't count. Discomfort is supposed to be a divine virtue. And that's why the people of Japan all work as long as they can, and as soon as they can, and as hard as they can. For they, too, consider themselves as soldiers with a divine mission. These women beat the earth in humble rhythm just as they did 1,000 years ago. These women work day after day, month after month in the rice fields, human machines producing rice and soldiers. Over their heads fly the latest planes to the wars. A diesel train thunders past. But these farmers work and live and eat like they did in the 17th century. The income for the whole family, as high as $150 a year and as low as $16 a year. The Jap peasant works harder, eats less, and pays more taxes than any other peasant on earth. But he seldom complains, for he is carrying out the divine will of the emperor. The white-collar Japanese in the daytime uses telephones and adding machines. But when he goes home, he puts on a kimono and lives as his ancestors did in the Middle Ages. Japanese houses have no foundations. There are no walls as we know them. No windows, no paint, no varnish, no curtains, no chairs, and no beds. To sleep, they spread a couple of quilts on the floor with no sheets and lay their heads on hard, round pillows. Their food lacks albumin, fats, and sugar. The standard of living is the same as it was hundreds of years ago, one of the lowest on earth. For Japan became industrialized not to raise the standard of living, but to prepare for conquest. This man in the factory doesn't work a 6-day, 48-hour week for good wages. He works a 72-hour week at starvation wages and frequently dies of tuberculosis at the age of 40.
Why do Japan's millions accept their fate in dumb, regimented silence? Why don't they rebel, revolt, organize labor unions? Well, first of all, having dedicated their lives to the emperor, belief in Japan's divine mission to conquer runs through the whole people. This makes practically all of them willing prisoners of a vicious, ironclad social structure, a system of regimentation so perfect it made Hitler's mouth water. On top of the heap of this social structure are leaders of the Army and Navy, the warlords who surround the emperor. They are Japan's first team. Nearly equal in power are the half-dozen super-rich industrial aristocratic families who own the wealth. They're the second team. And they play ball with the military rulers because the warlords give them cheap, uncomplaining labor and lush profits. And they, in turn, provide the money for the war machines. Next in line are the professional politicians, who are appointed by the government as rulers over the 47 provinces. These political stooges slavishly follow orders because their jobs and their very lives depend on the whims of the Army and Navy leaders. At the bottom of the heap are the peasants and workers, the hoi polloi, the masses. To make sure the masses stay in their place, there are the police, the gendarmes, the Japanese Gestapo, and the billions of ghosts of dead Japanese ancestors who watch over every act of the living. And just in case some Japanese don't believe in ghosts, they have an efficient, unique Japanese invention, the thought police. Yes, thought police, whose business it is to arrest you if you think dangerous thoughts. Who decides when your thinking is dangerous? That's easy. The thought police decides. About 10,000 people a year are arrested for thinking bad, selfish, dangerous thoughts. To keep the aristocrats and government officials from straying from the straight and narrow Japanese line, there is another strictly Japanese invention, secret organizations like the dreaded Black Dragon Society. This secret gangster organization, made up of thousands of fanatics, was headed by one of the world's most sinister characters, Mitsuru Toyama, chief of Japan's Murder Incorporated, sometimes called the unofficial emperor. 90 years old when he died in 1944, this dreaded master murderer held the threat of death over everyone in Japan who dared oppose the warlords too strongly. 1930. Premier Hamaguchi shot down at his desk. 1932. Prime Minister Inukai. Finance Minister Inouye. Baron Takuma Dan, head of the House of Mitsui. 1936. 4 political leaders killed. The Prime Minister escapes. Brother-in-law shot by mistake. But the main reason the warlords have been able to maintain their vicious grip on Japan lies in the educational system. Education is compulsory in Japan. 97% of the Japs are literate. But the Japanese school is not an institution for the development of the mind. It is a government-controlled institution designed to teach only officially selected facts and officially approved ideas. The object is to mass-produce students who all think alike. To teach in the shortest possible time only the knowledge and skills necessary to make the student an obedient, loyal subject of the divine emperor. The children are taught only how to do things. Their minds absorb the official lessons like a sponge absorbs water. And like a squeezed sponge, they give back the same water. Teachers are trained only by the government, and only those fanatically loyal to the emperor are allowed to teach. Here are some of the divine thoughts that are hammered home every day.
Our lives will become sincere and true only when they are offered to the emperor and the state. Our race has before it a great ideal, a great commission to assimilate the earth and the universe.
Thus, from childhood, the Japanese are taught they are descendants of gods, a race apart and superior to all others, born for only one purpose, to dedicate their lives to the emperor. The cardinal virtue, obedience to superiors. The cardinal ambition, Ako Ichiu, to cover the earth under a Japanese roof. That is, briefly, the social structure of Japan. That is the vicious system of political and religious regimentation that hammers, kneads, and molds the whole population until it becomes an obedient mass with but a single mind.
By 1894, the warlords thought they were ready for their first modern test of strength. As usual, their first move was against China. The process was simple. You send your armies over and attack. The Japs got the island of Formosa. On February 8, 1904, the Japs stepped into the Big League. Without warning, they attacked the Russian fleet at Port Arthur. 3 days later, they remembered to declare war. By defeating Russia, they temporarily obscured that country's influence in the Pacific. The Japanese were delirious. They had arrived. They had defeated their first major world power. And 6 years later, in 1910, they simply marched in and annexed Korea. In 1914, during the First World War, the Japanese, correctly figuring the Allies would win, declared war on Germany, took the Shantung Peninsula from the Germans, and grabbed off the German-owned Marshall, Caroline, and Mariana Islands. After the war, the Japanese emissaries signed anything and everything: League of Nations, disarmament agreement, nine-power treaty. But they insisted on keeping the Marshalls and Carolines and declared them taboo to all foreigners. Ako Ichiu was coming true. The Japs couldn't seem to make mistakes. They won every war in the field and in politics. Every time they tangled with the West, they got new territory. The warlords grew more popular than ever. In 1927, one of them, Barangi Chitanaka, made out a secret modern blueprint to achieve this mad dream and handed it to the emperor. It is called the Tanaka Memorial, Japan's Mein Kampf. It was a simple plan, but carefully thought out. To cover the earth with a Japanese roof, the Japs had first to conquer Asia. To conquer Asia, they needed manpower and raw materials. China had the manpower. Manchuria had iron and coal. So Manchuria would be first, then China. The next step was Siberia with its vast resources of timber, coal, wheat, and metals. Then south into Malaysia and the East Indies with its fabulous empire of tin, oil, and rubber. The United States was the last step. And when the orange groves of California and the cotton fields of Alabama were part of Japan's empire, when the factories of Los Angeles and Detroit were producing for Japan's war machine, then the rest of the world would fall like a ripe plum, and the Japs would have fulfilled Jimu's divine commandment to cover the 8 corners of the world with a Japanese roof. That was the plan, the blueprint, the specifications for world conquest. But the Japanese are careful people. There was much to do, many details to prepare at home and abroad before putting the plan into action. First, make sure of the home front, for in spite of every conceivable method of thought control, certain Western ideas were seeping into Japan, especially among city people. So Western music was banned. Instead, the government approved this. Western dancing was forbidden. Western movies were thrown out, and the people were made to see pictures of their ancient war heroes. Musicals began singing the praises of the Axis. Western card games were purged in favor of this. It's a game of super chess called Go. Actually, it is a game of military strategy. Western books and magazines not in accord with Japanese militarism were banned. Instead, these books were declared official reading. If We Fight by Admiral Shinsaku Hirata.
The attack on Hawaii must be the first battle in the War of the Pacific Ocean. If one snatches away the enemy's pluck, in the first battle, the American Navy will certainly become wearied in the wind of panic. Therefore, attack!
Arguments against American policies by Kawashima Seichiro.
We can land in the Puget Sound and Columbia River, the vicinity of San Francisco, and the vicinity of Los Angeles. But this is possible only after we have destroyed the American fleet.
Baseball was becoming Japan's national sport. It was popularized in Japan by visiting American teams. In 1931, an all-star team led by Lou Gehrig, Al Simmons, and Lefty Grove played in Tokyo to standing room only. The warlords became afraid of baseball. They tried to stop it. And when later on, Babe Ruth was brought over by a Tokyo newspaper publisher, the hatchet men acted. One night, the newspaper publisher was found butchered to death. To try to take the place of baseball, the rulers encouraged the old Shinto-approved sports like sumo, kendo, and judo. Judo, or jiu-jitsu, is the act of giving in, making your opponent lose his balance, then trip him, choke him, hit, chop, poke, or kick his vital spots. The way of gentleness, it is called. Jap diplomats think in terms of judo. For example, make an offer of peace just before you intend to attack. Kendo means the way of the sword. There's no defense in kendo. It's all offense. You either kill or are killed. The Jap army thinks in terms of kendo. Sumo, or Japanese wrestling, is the act of calmly waiting or stalling for time. Then a swift charge to overcome your opponent. The Japanese people think in terms of sumo. Calm, peaceful, serene, like their volcano Mount Fuji, with violent eruptions of brutal passions in between. But even as they hammered their home front into shape, the gentlemen of Japan were softening up the rest of the world for their Tanaka plan. To every country marked for conquest, they sent their agents. Army officers posing as laborers, shopkeepers, gardeners. Along the coasts, officers of the Imperial Japanese Navy, masquerading as fishermen, piloted tiny boats equipped with diesel engines and radio sending sets. They fished for pearls off the South Pacific Islands. They fished for tuna off the coast of California. They made some good hauls. Other Japanese traveled widely as tourists, photographing the sights of Honolulu and Seattle. Something to show the folks back home. Still others went to work in barber shops, strange barbers who didn't talk. All this information was collected, studied, filed away in Tokyo, ready for use when the day came for the army to go into action. Wherever Japanese spies went, Japanese propaganda followed, especially in Asia. The message was simple.
The white man is exploiting you. Drive him out. Asia for the Asiatics. Japan is your protector.
Meanwhile, to finance the war machine, the second team, the industrialists, started their briefcase offensive. From the factories of Osaka, the mills of Tokyo, the chemical plants of Nagoya, the steel mills of Iwata, the shipyards of Nagasaki, came the economic bullets. But these belching factories in the cities were not the real machinery behind Japan's trade war. For here was the real machinery. The slums of the cities, where 64% of Japan's products were made in small backroom factories employing 5 people or less. There are hundreds of thousands of these factories in the home where father, mother, and children work in semi-slavery. Taking advantage of these low labor costs, The industrialists of Japan knew they could undersell every other nation on earth, and they did. All over the world, they dumped their cheap labor products. And to their dumping, they added piracy. Countless patented articles were manufactured and sold throughout Asia under their American names. The two best-known American spark plugs. Genuine old Scotch whiskey was made in the distilleries of Osaka. Matches made in Kobe were labeled made in Sweden. They undersold silk to the silk-producing Italians. They undersold England's cotton goods in the home of her own cotton industry. They undersold beer to the beer-producing Germans. American toothbrushes, retailing at 35 to 50 cents each, were copied in Japan to retail in American chain stores at 10 cents each. They even undersold us with our own American flag. And with the money accumulated in foreign countries with these cheap labor exports, did they in turn buy automobiles, ice boxes, or food? Did they erect better homes for the Jap workers or improve their living conditions? No, indeed. Instead, they imported oil, scrap iron, tin, rubber, aluminum, and secretly built up their powerful war machine. A fanatic nation turning its sweat into weapons for conquest. Sweat for guns. Sweat for planes. Sweat for ships. Sweat for war.
But the greatest weapon made in Japan was the first team product, the Japanese soldier. As iron ore is melted in furnaces to remove impurities, so in Japan, humanitarian impurities are burned out of the child. As the steel is shaped by beating and hammering, so is the boy hammered and beaten into the shape of the fanatic samurai. Final product, the Japanese soldier. Ready to shoot, smash, and slug Jap superiority into all non-Japanese people. And so on September 18th, 1931, the first team kicked off. The warlords, faithfully following the Tanaka Plan, launched their shooting war in Manchuria. Co-prosperity, enlightenment, justice, truth, peace, peace, peace.
レヒドールだけは降伏するが、フィリピンにおける全米飛軍を降伏させるわけにはいかないと主張し、ウェンライトはさらに譲る気配も見せなかった。我が軍司令官本間中将がウェンライトを臨検したのはその日の夕暮れである。ハブカーベンの荒れ果てた民家に新しい世界史の第1ページを飾るべき歴史的な会見が行われた。
In groups of 100, the sick, battle-weary, starved American and Filipino prisoners were lined up, beaten, and searched, then herded together for what was to be for them the March of Death. This March of Death is a lasting monument to the insane arrogance and brutality of the Japanese soldier. Burning with malaria, racked with diarrhea and dysentery, the men, barely able to stand, were marched for some 7 days without food or water. Their helmets were purposely knocked off to expose them to the blistering sun. For hours at a time, they were given the torturing sun treatment. At night, they were packed into enclosures so tight, the men lay in their own human defecation. In the daytime, they marched in the sun. Thousands dropped out and were bayoneted and shot. Those that made it to the prison camps were subjected to unspeakable humiliation and torture. 3 years later, when rescued by MacArthur, this is how they looked. In retreating before MacArthur, the enraged Japs wantonly burned most of the city of Manila. Before our men could kill them all, the sons of heaven had bound and slaughtered thousands of helpless Filipino civilians in the inner city.
Prosperity, peace, enlightenment. That's roughly your enemy, Japan. A nation with a tough, seasoned, fanatic army of 4 million still practically intact. A nation that can supply 1 million new conscripts a year willing to die in their foxholes. A nation that believes we will throw in the sponge because they will outfight us, outlast us, outdie us. A nation hell-bent to rule the world or commit national suicide. Defeating this nation is as necessary as shooting down a mad dog in your neighborhood. With only a portion of our total strength, we have already cracked Japan's outer defenses. General MacArthur has brilliantly retaken the Philippines and cut their supply lines to the Indies. The trifibious power attack to retake Corregidor was the payoff that thrilled the hearts of Corregidor's gaunt American and Filipino defenders of 1942.
Our Marines topped their glorious fighting history by killing 20,000 Japanese on Iwo Jima. On Okinawa, we trapped and destroyed over 100,000 of their best troops. Our Navy has sent to the bottom approximately 3/4 of their naval strength. Our submarines and air forces have sunk millions of tons of their shipping. From the airfields near Japan, paid for in American blood, our air forces are systematically blasting Jap factories and war plants. Now that the Nazi gangsters have been blown apart, now we can concentrate the full fury of our total power on Japan. The power of a navy bigger than all other navies combined. Of an air force greater than all other air forces combined. The power of the best equipped and hardest hitting army the world has ever seen.
We're going to destroy Japan's armies, Japan's navy, Japan's air forces, Japan's war factories, Japan's whole power to wage war.